Thank you. Hi, everybody, and thanks for showing up. We're in a university, and what is a university, and where did it come from, and how did we invent it, and why are you here, right? One of the reasons we're at a university is to study things, and one of the main things we want to study is you, because you are the strangest thing in the universe. You don't think so. When you talk to people about the miraculous performances that they execute, they're not impressed much. I mean, language, a 3-year-old can do it, right? Thinking about, wouldn't it be nice if we were in Tuscany and we could have bistecca fiorentina? No, I'm not in Tuscany, and you're not in Tuscany, and we don't have bistecca fiorentina with Tuscan wine. But we can think about that, and we can make a plan. Well, so what, right? Or being able to contemplate the astrophysics in the sky above us and say, well, next year, when this constellation comes around, we'll have to plant these crops again. There's nothing else anybody who has ever seen that can do any of that except you. I lecture all the time on how brilliant other animals are. And you have to understand, it's not that we can do everything and are the best at everything. So, for example, I cannot fly, but the birds can fly, right? I cannot photosynthesize like a plant. And, you know, I bet none of you can either, right? Can't do it. Can't do it. Can't smell like a dog. Cannot fly as quietly as an owl. Lots of things that human beings can't do and other species can do very, very well. Also, we are on a cline, we are on a gradient, we are on a scale with other animals. We see like them. We all have the common mammalian brain. A lot of what they do, we do. You share 99% of your DNA with a chimpanzee. But you're very different from a chimpanzee. As impressive as the chimpanzee is. You share 50% of your DNA with a banana. But you are very different from a banana. Okay? Why? Well, when I was in high school, nobody cared about high school. We cared about the beach and surfing and fish tacos and all the things that go with sun and sand and surf. And the Beach Boys were my local band. I didn't understand at the time that they were anything. You just went to the parking lot and the Beach Boys were playing, you know. Wish they all could be California girls. That was life, right? But I was astonished at what people could do. The way they could talk to each other. The way they'd understand things. When they got into a crowd, how they would adjust. How they would remember, how they would plan, how they would think. I thought, okay, this is really the weirdest stuff I've ever seen. Somewhere somebody must know about this. And so in those days, what you had to do is you had to plant trees or build houses and make a few $100s and get a little backpack and hitchhike across the United States and fly to Europe, because Europe was where they knew about everything. That's where culture was. So I went around Europe and I visited universities. I was 16 when I did this. I thought, okay, let's just check it all out. And I checked out Europe every summer. And I didn't find what I was looking for. Hadn't found what I was looking for. So I thought, okay, I'll go to school. I'll go to Berkeley because they know everything at Berkeley. I went to Berkeley. And I was looking for somebody who could understand human beings. And I took some psychology courses, but we were studying rats back then. You know, will the rat turn left? Or will the rat turn right? You know, we wanted to have a theory of left-turning and right-turning rats. That was okay, you know, rats can move and they can see, but that wasn't the kind of performance that I was interested in. So I studied mathematics because I was a good Pythagorean, and I thought that mathematics was behind everything, right? Music is really mathematics, right? You have the circle of fifths and good harmony and tonality, and if you have a string and it makes a sound and you press it right in the middle, boom, you can predict the other sound. Ratios, rational numbers. I'm beginning to get it. And the Pythagoreans thought that mathematics must be driving the universe because, you know, there were ratios in the celestial bodies. And the idea came up that the Earth was at the center and there were spheres, but they were translucent and you could see through them. And things were stuck in the sphere, and that's why it went through the sky. There were the fixed stars, and then there were these other planets and things. And it was really mathematics, because you could see this thing is moving in this direction, this is moving in this, you plot it all out. And also, I thought, well, it's brains that are thinking and doing all these wonderful things, so let's get a mathematical theory of brains and what's a very large-scale system. So I started working with a mathematician who was really a mathematical biologist on the mathematics of brains. And I studied languages, and because I was working on the mathematics of brains, I studied neuroscience. And I had a good time. It was Berkeley in the 70s. And I would come to Europe every summer. And I learned a lot, but I was disappointed because there was no place that was actually studying why human beings are so strange and why they can do what they do. On the contrary, you would find people say things like, well, human beings have language. And I say, no, duh, they have language. Now, how do you explain that? I don't know. Come on, a 3-year-old can do it. Let's just figure out what, that didn't work for me. So I took 2 years off, and I went back to the beach in San Diego, the place that I always think has the answers to everything. And I walked on the beach and I thought about what I would do. I wasn't certain I would go back to graduate school because, you know, what's the point? But I went back to graduate school and I went through very fast, and I decided I would work on higher order human cognition and how human beings can do the things that they do. And I got very lucky because when I was about 2/3 of the way finished writing my dissertation, which was on a certain dimension of grammar, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation decided that they were very tired of individual departments in the university looking at this or that part of the human being. You understand, in that time, the biologists didn't take to the linguists. I talked to my neuroscience teachers about figuring out about consciousness or creativity or language, and their answer, I loved them, they loved me, their answer was no. That's metaphysical, that's magical, that's speculative. When we figure out how the brain works, then it will all scale up like magic. And then we will understand how people are doing things, right? But right now, hunker down, Mark, and work on those ion pumps, calcium pumps, right? Potassium pumps, myelination, the electrical discharge down the axon, how a dendrite works, how a synapse is built, right? Okay. The artificial intelligence community, which I worked with at Berkeley and Stanford, really didn't talk to the linguists, and the linguists didn't talk to them. So these things were very siloed. But the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation said, no, we need to put these people together. So they started gushing lots and lots of money to anybody who would engage in the integrated study of the mind. And so we started putting these different communities together with leaders who were pretty freaky and had already been working in these kinds of fields, people who worked on perceptrons or, this and that and the other. And suddenly there was funding for these kinds of things. And that's how I ended up being employed, and my dissertation being something other than a thing that made you unemployable, right? I got jobs and so on. And I was looking for a place, and I didn't find it. So I thought I'd try to be that place where you studied all these things at the same time. And there were reasons to study them at the same time. In fact, I asked myself, how did universities get in the spot? So this place studies art history, and this place studies German. And this department studies Scandinavian, and this department studies music composition, and this one studies music performance, and this one studies, children and their anxieties. This one studies, and on and on. How did it get all separated with these people never talking to each other, right? And I think there's kind of an answer, and that is that people learn. You're not just like a lizard that comes out and you don't learn much. You learn a lot. And if you go on in art, you get a lot better. And if you go on in music, you get a lot better. And if you go on in math, you get a lot better. So this narrow specialization really does make sense for training expert performance, right? I mean, you can't just walk over and pick up an electric guitar and say, I've never played this before, but I'm a human being. I think I'm going to be Eric Clapton. No, it doesn't work. You have to actually work on it. And so you got departments that engaged in specializations. You'd have that mathematician out there working on the Lagrange hypothesis. That really made sense. But if what you wanted to study was the human mind, it didn't make much sense, because I'm not Eric Clapton, but I can understand music. We could all sing together. The great artists wouldn't be great artists if other minds could not pay attention to their art and recognize things that are going on. And also, kids are plastic. Any kid born any time in the last 50,000 years could have learned any language if you drop them into the right content. So they start off with all this capacity in all these areas, and their abilities seem to come up sort of at the same time. We don't have a different brain when we are doing different things. We don't say, so now I am going to cook, and I put in this brain. I'm cooking. Oh, wait, I have to answer the phone. Let me take that out. Now I have a different brain. Oh, and now I have to do some mathematics. You don't have a different brain at different times when you're doing all of these different things with the same brain. And the child is learning all of these things at the same time. So here I'm going to show you a baby that encounters an iPad. And you might even be able to hear it if I put this down here. This baby's trying to make the magazine work like an iPad. It's poking it and it's... It's a baby that can't talk yet. I got it. Ha. Yeah. Okay, so thing one, the child seems to be able to engage with all of these things at the same time. And in fact, they seem to reinforce each other. It's not, we don't find that the child first learns how to move, and then learns how to add, and then learns how to talk, and then learns how to interact with others. All of these things are happening simultaneously and reinforcingly, right? Now, another bit is that if you look at how your species arose, you find that all human beings in the last 50,000 years seem to be able to do the very weird things that you can do. But before that, not so much. Most of the things that you are interested in had to be invented in the last 50,000 years, like writing and reading. Writing is at most 8,000 years old. Not even really. That's a few scratches on a bone. Writing and reading as we know it are really only a few thousand years ago old, not even really. Not very long ago, whole populations were mostly illiterate, only a few. You had to learn it, right? But you all can learn it. It's not like you got a new genetic ability that lets you learn writing. You had to invent all these kinds of things. You see, 50,000 years ago, more or less, during the Upper Paleolithic, the archaeological record begins to show evidence of astonishing ranges of creativity in all of these performances. And by creativity, I don't mean just Mozart. I mean the human baby is infinitely creative. If you take an old Darwin tool set, which is just a rock that's broken a certain way, that was developed by our ancestors, it lasted for 800,000 years and no one changed it. But if you give it to a human baby, it will do something different with it in 15 minutes. Astonishingly creative in language, in tool use, art, music, religion, ritual, fashion, mathematical insight, scientific discovery, advanced tool use, advanced social cognition. And in the phylogenetic record, they all come up reinforcingly. And it's only about 50,000 years ago. Of course, I don't care about the absolute timing. It depends on what the archaeologists find. If I had a time machine, I know right where I would go back and look, but I don't have a time machine. But the range of behavior that we're talking about, this super weird behavior, is only about 50,000 years old. That's nothing evolutionarily. That's a blink of an eye in evolutionary time. And it's in that period that everything comes up. It's just that last little bit. It's not 6 million years ago when we separated from chimpanzees and bonobos. It's not 2 million years ago when the genus came up. It's not 150,000 years ago when your ancestors seemed to have your skeleton and your kind of body parts and so on. It's about 50,000 years ago. And interestingly, it all comes up at about the same time. If you see a ring-tailed lemur on Madagascar, and you're there, and they're doing what they do, sure, there are some differences. The males and the females might behave a little differently. The infants, the adolescents, and the adults behave a little differently. If there's a lake, they might do something with the lake. Now you go over the hill and you visit your other friends, the ring-tailed lemurs. And you know, they're behaving just the same way. Maybe a little differently if they don't have the lake, but it's just the same way. Now, if you are in an island in Croatia, a land of 1,240 islands, you can be in one village and you go over the mountain to the other village and they flirt differently. They eat slightly different food. Oh, that's not the way we make it here. They have a slightly different pronunciation. They wear slightly different clothes. This is amazing. In the academy, we celebrate diversity. Sure, we like human diversity. That's awesome. But that's not the question. The question is, why is there any diversity? For other species, there really isn't. There's some individual differences. You have species-wide mental operations that set you up for culture. Why is there any culture? Mostly other species, I could lecture about this, mostly other species don't have culture, and if they do, it falls apart pretty fast, where by culture we mean something somebody can come up with and hand it on, and it survives even when that person isn't around, and that is not species-wide. That is only in some parts of the deal. We all have the same mammalian brain. We even all have the same primate brain. Why is there diversity? Right? How did this happen? Well, one thing to say is that we have a lot to explain. Why in the child? Why in the species? Does this stuff all come up and operate together? Why are you so distinctive? What are the general theories that we could develop? How do they work? How can new meanings arise? How does the mind go beyond its local scale? So I can talk to you about next year we'll be in Tuscany having that Florentine bistecca fiorentina. You don't have any trouble. Try talking about that to your dog, right? That's not going to work even if light steak. Well, partly because the universities were arbitrarily broken up into individual departments and disciplines, which makes sense because if you want to be really expert in music, maybe you should just keep studying music. If you want to be really expert in algebraic group theory, maybe you should just keep... The universities, when they come to study the human being, break everything about a human being up into different departments. So you could think, erroneously, I assert, that you have lots and lots of different traits. That you've got a language system in there, and you've got a music system in there, and you've got a system in there to drive a car, and you have a system in there for architecture, and these are all just different systems, and that you add them up and you get you. Yeah, I think that's wrong. I think we could argue about it, but I think that's wrong. I think that there are individual differences and there are some functional specificities that we need to study. But I want to quote V.S. Ramachandran, a famous neuroscientist, about how we're studying the brain and why we shouldn't be studying it that way. He says, for over half a century, modern neuroscience has been on a reductionist path, breaking things down into ever smaller parts with the hope that understanding all the little pieces will eventually explain the whole, that it will add up, that it will scale up. Unfortunately, many people think that because reductionism is so often useful in solving problems, it is therefore sufficient for solving them, and generations of neuroscientists have been raised on this dogma. This misapplication of reductionism leads to the perverse and tenacious belief that somehow reductionism itself will tell us how the brain works, when what is really needed are attempts to bridge different levels of discourse. The Cambridge physiologist Horace Barlow recently pointed out at a scientific meeting that we have spent 5 decades, make it now 7 decades, studying the cerebral cortex in excruciating detail, but we still don't have the foggiest idea of how it works or what it does. He shocked the audience by suggesting that we are all like asexual Martians visiting Earth who spend 50 years examining the detailed cellular mechanisms and biochemistry of the testicles without knowing anything at all about sex. Yeah. Well, I think it's much more likely that there are general mental operations that lie behind the specific performances that come up at the same time reinforcingly in the child and that came up reinforcingly in our species, and that once you get those, then This range, art, music, science, religion, language, grammar, multimodal communication, gesture, advanced social cognition, advanced tool use, and so on and so on and so on, become possible because now you have a slight change in what all mammals, what all great apes have. And a lot of times in science, I don't have time for this lecture, but a lot of time in science we have shown that a small change in the causes can produce a tremendous change in the effects. This is the nature of chaos theory and complexity theory. And these are mathematical, physical, and biological disciplines. And I think that the approach to cognitively modern human beings needs to learn from chaos and complexity theory about how a small change in causes can produce a tremendous change in effects. And this is where I look for inspiration. Now, there's another reason that you might want to think we could study these things separately instead of in an integrated kind of way. And that's because I was trained in neurobiology, and the big hope in neurobiology was that you had different parts of the brain that did different things. Sure, that's true in a way. Nobody thinks that you can smell with your retina, right? But it's mostly wrong. The idea that there's this part of the brain that does this, and there's this part of the brain that does this, and there's this part of the brain that does this. Brain imaging, you understand all evidence about what's going on in somebody's mind is indirect. We have no direct way. A mind has no direct way to see what's going on in another mind. It's all indirect. You can speak to me, but that's just some longitudinal wave striking my ear. It's not me seeing what you're thinking. I can look at your face, but that's just some photon striking my eye. It's as indirect as it can get. I have to make inferences about whether you're bored or attentive. I have to do the work here to try to figure out what's going on in your mind. We can do brain imaging, but brain imaging, I work in brain imaging. I spend a lot of money designing experiments and running them. Brain imaging is very blunt, very crude, despite the fact that it's made wonderful advances in ERP and blood oxygen level dependent measures for fMRI and so on. Well, there was the hope that there was like Broca's area, and that would handle syntax. And Wernicke's area would handle semantics, so you'd sum up these little parts of the brain. Now, of course, that doesn't work at all, because, of course, Broca's area is involved in speech production. It's also involved in movement preparation, so when you're about to move, Broca's area is helping to set up the planning, action sequencing, the perception of motion preparation, the perception of action sequencing, action recognition, imagery of human motion, action imitation. So you'll see things like this, and yes, this is fine. There is some brain specialization, but please don't be misled. You can take the things in the cortex, the neocortex, that are supposed to be the most dedicated to a certain thing, like vision and motor areas. Visual and motor areas are involved in language processing, indispensably, and many other higher cognitive tasks. If you haven't been introduced to this, you need to. The fusiform face area, which is supposed to be, hey, one of the great things you're best at is recognizing faces. You see, Taylor Swift from behind, only one half with sunglasses. Doesn't matter, you'll always recognize Taylor Swift. You see her the next day, she's walking down the street, no sunglasses, full frontal, bang, that's Taylor Swift. And it works for anybody. You're really good at recognizing faces. Why? Answer, well, there must be a part of the brain that's dedicated to recognizing faces. They were so sure of this, they called this the fusiform face area. There it is, FFA, hanging right back there. But of course, it's used in recognizing cars. It's used in recognizing birds. It's used in recognizing a range of stimuli, right? In fact, I recommend to you the work of Michael L. Anderson, who wrote a book called After Phrenology. They, for example, took all of the work on fMRI they could find in the world and put it together. It's very sophisticated. They had to develop a lot of mathematical filters. And they took 11 different tasks. 3 of them were perceptual sensory. 2 of them were action, and 6 of them were cognitive tasks. So they made the biggest range of 11 tasks they could get. And then they looked at the fMRI work on which part of the brains are active and aroused for each of those tasks. So I want to point out to you that the red here in the brain is the part of the brains that are involved in at least 10 of them, of the most different you could get. In order to get any part of the brain that's only involved in half of them, half of this disparate, it has to be black. There's only one little spot. Okay? Now, I'm not dissing neuroscience. I teach cognitive neuroscience. And when I do, I come in and I show my students my old textbooks with my notes in the margin. And I underline the things they say that are not just taken as completely settled. This is just only a moron would not know this. And I say, and this is now known to be wrong. And this is now known to be wrong. And this is now known to be wrong. So those of you who are studying all of these fields, understand these fields of studying human beings are embryonic. Much of what you are being taught will be discovered later to be wrong because we're only just developing these fields. Science is moving forward. This has happened to me. Okay, so again, in another field where you might think, oh, look, I don't have to study the mind, have an integrated study of the mind. I just need to know about how people recognize faces because the brain, it's a little brain, it's a face recognition system. No, that's not the way kids work. That's not the way phylogeny seems to work. It's not the way the brain seems to work. This is hard to swallow. In fact, even the idea that neurons is doing all the work and you can ignore the astrocytes and the glial cells seems to be wrong. Now I have to teach lots and lots of different transmission possibilities in the brain. New ones are being discovered every week. Science pushes forward. So, Michael Anderson after phrenology. And in fact, I went through a period of my life thinking that we had a solution. That was, what's language? Well, language wants to communicate truth. What's truth? Well, that's studied in philosophy. It's logic. So a lot of my work in math as a student was studying logic, mathematical logic, and set theory. I basically my specialties were mathematical logic, set theory, and some algebra, right? Because this was, after all, the mathematics of truth. And we developed truth tables, A and B. That's an AND gate. If A is true and B is true, then the phrase A and B is true. So knowing the meaning of what somebody says, Tarski said, was knowing the real world conditions under which it would be true. Wow, truth theoretical idea of communication. And this lined up with electrical engineering because you could make electrical circuits that would mimic the logic. So if you had an OR gate and either this wire or this wire brought in current, then wire would come out because either one was good. 1 for current, 0 for no current, 1 for current. So A or B, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 1. Great. And an AND, however, had to be A and B. You had to get current from both of these or this current came out. So Principia Mathematica, we analyzed various kinds of logic operators. We thought language could be logic. We could build electrical circuits. You have to imagine me at age 17 building electrical circuits to put into computers to compute the truth conditions of language. And why not? Weren't neurons just things that sent spikes? If it sent a spike down the axon, that's a 1. If it doesn't send a spike down the axon, that's a 0. So we had this nifty trifecta. We had this truth conditional theory of meaning, computer logic gates, and the neuron doctrine. And all of that now has really taken tremendous hits. These are the kinds of things that I used to design in electrical engineering because they were logic gates. And it lined up with our ideas of our ideas of how it might be that we could have an integrated study of the mind in AI. That stuff is valuable. I teach it. It's good to know. It's not modern. It does not stand up to current linguistics or neuroscience or artificial intelligence. Good to know, but in some ways kind of historical. There's another reason to have the integrated study of the mind in the university. So I'm not saying we shouldn't have the individual disciplines. Let 1,000 flowers bloom. Let there be psychology. Let there be decision-making. Let there be, yes, but there should be somewhere in the university, it's indispensable now, somewhere in the university where all those disciplines have to come together and defend what they think to other experts from other disciplines. Because it is so easy in academic sociology for us to go down a path, down a rat hole, and make a little mistake at the beginning or miss something and never get back to it. Why do we never get back to it? Well, because we get our promotions by publishing a paper that answers a little bit to the paper that was, these are the big papers, right? It's answer those papers, and down you go and down you go. You get a raise. You get prizes. You get narrower and narrower and narrower in your academic sociology. That's good. Sometimes it's good, but it can be really, really bad not to have to defend those things. So I work in decision theory. I publish a lot of things in decision theory. And in game theory, there is a way you operate. And I have operated that way, and I have published. But you go find my paper with Matt McCubbins called Against Game Theory. And what it will show, along with lots and lots and lots and lots of other articles, is that game theory is disastrous as a predictor of how human beings perform. They do not perform that way. Under the best conditions, they do not perform that way. John Nash quit the field because he found that they do not perform that way. Well, behavioral game theory has tried to fix it in various ways. I know these guys. I work with these people. Like, okay, you're altruistic, but you are a dominator, and you are an egalitarian. So we can explain how people deviate from rationality because they have a type. Hold on. Matt McCubbins and I spent $250,000 running the cleanest experiments we could possibly design, putting people into the best conditions so they were most likely to be consistent over 2.5 hours of tasks. And we made several of these tasks so that they were mathematically just the same. So whatever type you were, you should have performed the same. And what we found, you can go read the paper, is people are consistently inconsistent, right? In our subject studies around the globe, lots of money, we found only 4 people who were consistent in the kind of performance that they had in game theory. Now, does that mean we get rid of game theory? No. I mean, they give the Nobel Prize in economics to game theorists. Sure, let's have some. But you need to bring game theory into the integrated study of the human mind so we can actually have a conversation about what is the value of it, where's it going, what are your ideas about how people work. Another one, so that's game theory. Another one, and again, I'm not dissing psychology. I love psychology. I publish in psychological journals. Some of the smartest people in the world are in psychology. And they have good ideas and so on. However, it's very easy for this discipline to become a rote sausage-making machine where you take 18 subjects that you got from your class and you try to imagine one variable that you can change, and you test it and see if you get a significant result. Now, the problems with this, the threats to validity of this, remember, I spent a lot of time in psychology. I publish in psychology. I love psychologists. I publish with them. The great ones are not, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how do you train students. A human being is built to be social and to operate in context. If you take a piece of copper into the lab and you try to have very clean, pristine, only one difference in the variable to see what the results are, okay, I understand for the copper. You take the human being into the lab, that is the most ecologically invalid situation you've ever been in. The biggest variable, the biggest treatment is that they're in an experiment and they know it. They're human beings, right? So I teach how to design behavioral experiments. The threats to validity are immense. The idea that you're taking something into the lab so it's better, maybe not, maybe it's worse, and then you run statistics on it. One of the things that I do with all of my students who want to work in cognitive science or psychology is I made them read this paper by Gerd Gigerenzer, one of the greatest statisticians who has ever lived. It's called Mindless Statistics, and it is about the uniform practices in psychology of applying statistical methods that cannot be applied to the things that the psychologists are applying them to. Now, this is not a problem with psychology or psychologists or the students. It's a problem with the design of the university. That is, we have created disciplines for studying the human mind in which you can go down a corridor, down a funnel of studying the human mind in a certain way and just go on with that without having to deal with the integrated study of the human mind. So there needs to be some place in the university where we do that. Especially, remember that when you are engaged in an individual study, you become specialized in that kind of study, and you're sociological. So you're likely to have tribal bonding. So I wanted to see integrated study of the human mind. One of the things I did was create Red Hen Lab. What we do in Red Hen Lab is we put together from all kinds of different fields to study multimodal communication and the human mind. They're neuroscientists, they're artificial intelligence people, they're coders, and we create these networks that are really outside of departments and universities. I'm proud to say that not only are we here to celebrate the Center of Cognitive Science, headed by Professor Renate Geld, and the creation of a program in cognitive science with co-heads Professor Renate Geld and Professor Dario Bojanac, but also that Zagreb is the representative in Croatia of Red Hen Lab. We've been sponsored by Google for 10 years, and one of the important things there is that we bring in industry. Some of the best research is now being done, not in the university, but in industry. We need to go and talk to industry. They need to talk to us. The biggest paper in AI in the last 10 years came out of Google. It's called Attention is All You Need. And this kind of community helps us study language. So I have a new book published with 3 other people. It's a networked book. It's called Co-Pilots for Linguists, AI Constructions, and Conceptual Frames. And it's about how large language models and AI can now help the linguists do research on human language, and we involve neuroscientists and people like that. If you have any questions about these things, you can go to markturner.org. But what we're looking at here is great praise, because this university, this nation, now has a spot where you have put together just what my university back home is trying to put together. AI is hit, generative AI is here. How shall we study it? The human mind has to interact with the artificial intelligence. How does that happen? You now have a team that has synthetic agents in it. And you will be used, you can't run and you can't hide. It's sink or swim. It's everywhere. You may not know that AI is in everything, but trust me, it is. If you think you're ignoring AI, you're not. How do we go forward? What will be our future? How can we think about the future? How will we put this together? And we all have to wrestle with that right now. You have the advantage And we have cognitive science at Case Western Reserve University, but my provost has put us on a team to try to figure out how to have an integrated study of natural and artificial intelligence that involves everybody who works on the human mind and on AI. And you have it right here in Faculty of Electrical Engineering and Computing, put together with humanities and the social sciences. And you have 30 people in this program that are in their first year of training. So often, after talks like this, you thank the speaker. But what I want to say is, as a kid who was looking at these things when he was 15 years old on the beach in Southern California and not able to find a group of people that worked like this, I am now looking at this and I want to thank you.